I didn't know my life would detonate in the middle of Christmas dinner. I didn't know that the chandelier glittering above a mahogany table could witness the clean, surgical collapse of a marriage. And I definitely didn't expect that the people laughing at me would be the ones begging before dessert was cleared. My name is Danielle Carter. 5 years ago, I married into one of the wealthiest families in the city. Tonight, at my husband's family Christmas dinner, they thought they were going to replace me. Yes, replace me. They had already chosen the woman, already rehearsed the speech, already decided how my humiliation would unfold in front of crystal glasses and imported china. What they didn't know was that every asset they believed they controlled was legally mine. The mansion glittered like a holiday fever dream, gold everywhere, mistletoe dangling from every archway, a Christmas tree so tall it could have applied for its own property tax exemption. But beneath the cinnamon candles and curated laughter, something sour lingered in the air. On the drive there, my husband, Daniel Thompson, had been strangely kind. Too kind. He hadn't looked at me with warmth in months, only thinly veiled irritation. Yet tonight he smiled, held my hand, asked if I was excited. That should have been my first warning. Inside the dining room, his father William sat at the head of the table like a king surveying subjects, his silver hair immaculate, his smile precise and predatory. His daughter Monica was already halfway through her third glass of wine, playing the role of chaotic heiress with a superiority complex. And then there was her, tall, blonde, impeccable posture, Ivy League confidence radiating off her like perfume. "Everyone," William announced, raising his glass, "I'd like you to meet Evelyn Ashworth, Harvard MBA, excellent pedigree." Then he paused. "She'll be absolutely perfect to step into Danielle's position once the restructuring and divorce proceedings are finalized." The laughter came in layers. Daniel's first. Then Monica's shrill cackle, William's booming approval. They were waiting for me to shatter. Instead, I buttered my dinner roll, calmly. "Interesting," I said. "Did you also tell her the company is in my name?" The laughter died, and that was only the beginning. I'm 37 years old. I built my tech consulting company from a secondhand desk in an office above a Chinese restaurant that permanently smelled like garlic and soy sauce. Before the Thompsons ever knew my name, before Daniel ever wrapped his arm around my waist at some charity gala, I was grinding 18-hour days, answering my own phones, pitching clients who barely looked up from their laptops while I spoke. My grandfather left me a modest inheritance when he passed. Not old money wealth. Not generational estates, just enough capital to take a risk. I didn't waste a cent. I reinvested everything. Small contracts turned into bigger ones. I hired carefully. I built a lean operation that focused on actual value, not buzzwords, not flashy branding, just results. By the time I met Daniel at a mutual friend's networking event, my company was already profitable. Quietly, steadily profitable. He was charming in that polished way men from money often are. Well-tailored suit, easy smile, stories about ski trips in Aspen and summers in Martha's Vineyard. He was fascinated by me. "You built it yourself?" he asked that first night, leaning in like I'd just confessed to scaling Everest. "Yes." He looked impressed. I mistook that for admiration. Now I understand it was assessment. Daniel came from legacy wealth. His father, William, owned half the city's commercial real estate. His mother had passed years earlier, leaving behind portraits and expectations. The Thompsons moved through society like they owned the oxygen. The first time Daniel brought me to their mansion, I felt like I'd stepped into a museum curated to intimidate. Oil paintings, marble floors, a dining table that could seat Wyoming. William studied me like I was a business acquisition. "So," he said, swirling scotch that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the time, "you're the entrepreneur." "Yes, sir." He smiled thinly. "Ambitious women are interesting." Monica, already tipsy at 3 p.m., leaned over and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Let's see how long this one lasts." I should have left then. But Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. Ignore them, he murmured. They'll come around. They never did. From the beginning, William treated me like temporary inventory. At social events, he'd introduce me as Daniel's current venture, smiling like it was a clever joke. Daniel would laugh. That was the first fracture. He never defended me. Over time, subtle criticism became routine. You could upgrade your wardrobe, Daniel once said casually. My friends notice these things. My friends don't really know what to make of you, he'd add. You're brilliant, but you don't quite fit our lifestyle. I worked, they performed. Monica cycled through relationships like seasonal decor. 3 serious engagements by 40, each ending in dramatic implosion. Yet somehow she felt qualified to critique my marriage. You need to be softer, she slurred at one family brunch. Men don't like competing with their wives. Competing. That word lingered. When William suggested joining my company as a strategic investor, he played it masterfully. You've built something impressive, he said one evening over dinner, but scaling requires connections, infrastructure, legacy. Daniel supported the idea enthusiastically. It'll make us unstoppable, he told me. Dad's network could triple valuation. I was cautious. So I hired lawyers. The agreements were airtight. William would serve in an advisory capacity. Capital infusion. No ownership transfer. No voting majority. No asset claims. Every share certificate remained in my name. Every patent. Every property deed. Every intellectual asset. Daniel signed a prenuptial agreement before our wedding. It clearly separated premarital business assets. He signed without hesitation. Back then, he believed I was his golden ticket. Back then, he thought marriage meant merger. The red flags were subtle at first. Daniel growing distant, business trips, increased criticism, quiet resentment when industry magazines featured my interviews instead of his father's commentary. And then the lunches began. 3 afternoons a week. Always client meetings. Always vague. I ignored the unease in my chest. Until tonight. Tonight, as William toasted my replacement in front of crystal and candlelight, I realized something crucial. They never saw me as family. They saw me as leverage, and they thought they could discard me. The shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in quietly, like cold air slipping under a locked door. At first, it was just small comments. You're working late again, Daniel would say, though he knew perfectly well that end-of-quarter reporting required it. You don't have to prove anything anymore, he'd add. My family can carry us. Carry us. The phrasing bothered me. My company had been profitable long before he ever learned what EBITDA stood for. Then came the subtle exclusions. Business dinners William attended without me. Board updates that somehow happened informally at the country club. Daniel coming home with vague summaries instead of details. It was just strategy talk, he'd shrug. Nothing you needed to sit through. Nothing I needed to sit through. About my own company. I started noticing how often William referred to the firm as our expansion. How Daniel echoed him. We tripled valuation under Dad's guidance, Daniel once said at a cocktail party. Under Dad's guidance. I was standing right there. I watched investors shake William's hand while I stood half a step behind, like an accessory. And Daniel never corrected the narrative. Monica's commentary grew sharper. At least if something goes wrong, Daddy will fix it, she teased one evening, sipping champagne. That's the beauty of marrying well, Danielle. I smiled politely. Inside, something tightened. Then the lunches began. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, Daniel had off-site meetings. He would leave around noon, cologne freshly applied, voice clipped but controlled. He stopped initiating intimacy, stopped asking about my day, stopped looking at me the way he once had, with curiosity. Instead, he looked at me like competition. The distance wasn't explosive. It was surgical. When I asked directly one evening, sitting across from him at our kitchen island, he sighed dramatically. You're imagining problems, he said. You've been stressed, that's all. Gaslighting rarely sounds cruel. It sounds reasonable. And I wanted to believe him until the credit card statements arrived. I handle finances personally. I've always believed transparency is protection. When I noticed repeated charges at the St. Regis Hotel, always mid-afternoon, my pulse slowed in that strange, terrifying way it does before adrenaline hits. Room service for 2, 3 times a week. At first, I told myself it was client entertainment. Then I checked our client list. None of them were based near the St. Regis. I didn't confront him immediately. I gathered information, receipts, timestamps, transaction histories. And then one evening, while syncing devices for a software update, I noticed something Daniel must have forgotten. Our shared iCloud account, screenshots, messages, not romantic poetry, nothing that dramatic, just logistics. Same suite? See you at 1. Don't forget what we discussed about restructuring. Restructuring. That word again. I sat in my home office staring at the screen while snow fell outside. The house was silent. My breathing felt too loud. It wasn't just an affair. It was coordinated, professional, planned. The more I traced patterns, the clearer it became. Daniel and William had been positioning themselves for months. Increased advisory influence, financial maneuvering, gradual narrative shift that painted me as overworked and emotionally unstable. A convenient story if divorce proceedings were on the horizon. The Ivy League blonde, Evelyn Ashworth, had appeared in industry circles recently. Harvard MBA, specializing in corporate restructuring. William had been praising her publicly for weeks. I had dismissed it. Now the puzzle pieces aligned with sickening precision. They weren't just planning to replace me in Daniel's life. They were planning to replace me in my own company. And tonight's Christmas dinner wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was supposed to be the formal announcement. A humiliation disguised as celebration. What they didn't account for was one detail. I had spent years preparing for worst-case scenarios. Not because I mistrusted them, but because I never trust anyone with what I've built. When William announced Evelyn as my replacement, something strange happened inside me. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I went still. There's a moment when humiliation is expected of you. When everyone leans forward waiting for the collapse. I could feel it around the table, the anticipation, the almost gleeful cruelty. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arm draped casually over it, watching me, watching for impact. Evelyn shifted slightly in her seat. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. Hers weren't malicious, just ambitious. She believed she was stepping into a strategic opportunity. She didn't realize she'd been invited to a public execution. After the restructuring and divorce proceedings, William repeated smoothly, as if he were announcing dessert options. Monica laughed first. Loud, unsteady. Daniel followed. That laugh. That was the sound that broke something permanent. 5 years of swallowing comments. 5 years of adjusting myself to fit their world. 5 years of pretending not to notice the contempt. And now they were doing this publicly, spectacularly. I reached for my wine glass. My hand didn't shake. How interesting, I said softly. Did you also explain to Evelyn that the company is legally registered solely under my name? The room shifted. Daniel's smile flickered. William's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Evelyn blinked. I'm sorry? The corporation, I clarified gently. Every share certificate, every patent, every property deed, all under Danielle Carter. Daniel leaned forward, voice tight. Don't be dramatic. I'm not, I replied. I'm being accurate. William chuckled dismissively. Danielle, you're confused. Marriage creates shared interest. Not when there's a prenuptial agreement, I said. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Monica stopped mid-sip. I continued calmly. The prenup you signed before our wedding, Daniel, the one that explicitly separated premarital business assets. That's not what he started. It is, I interrupted quietly. Your lawyer explained it in detail. You were eager to sign. The silence thickened. Evelyn's posture straightened. Her confidence began to thin. William's voice sharpened. This is hardly appropriate dinner conversation. You began it, I reminded him. I could feel my heartbeat now. steady but strong, and I wasn't finished. While we're discussing restructuring, I added, turning to Daniel, perhaps we should clarify your afternoon meetings. His face drained of color. Don't, he warned under his breath. I ignored him. The St. Regis keeps meticulous records, I said, placing my phone on the table. Suite 1407, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. Room service for 2. Charge to our joint account. Monica gasped. William's jaw tightened. Evelyn's expression changed completely. Daniel's chair scraped loudly against the floor. You've been spying on me? When charges from a joint account fund hotel rooms, I replied evenly, that isn't spying, that's accounting. My voice didn't rise. That made it worse for them. Danielle, this is ridiculous, William snapped. You're misinterpreting professional meetings. Professional? I asked softly. Is that what we're calling lingerie purchases from La Perla immediately after? Daniel stood abruptly. This is insane. Is it? I tilted my head. Because the timestamps are quite clear. Monica dropped her wine glass. It shattered across her plate. Evelyn stood halfway out of her seat. Daniel, what is she talking about? Daniel's composure cracked visibly. It's not what you think. The irony almost made me smile. I had thought that too, for months. William tried to regain control. This is a private marital matter. No, I said calmly. It became public when you decided to announce my divorce like a corporate memo. Daniel's breathing was shallow now, anger mixing with fear. I turned to William. Since transparency is tonight's theme, perhaps we should also discuss company expense accounts. His eyes flashed. Be careful, he warned. I am, I replied. And then I opened the folder I had brought, because I hadn't come unprepared. Not tonight. The moment I placed the folder on the table, the room felt smaller. Not physically, psychologically. For years, I had been the one absorbing tension, adjusting tone, swallowing pride. Tonight, the gravity shifted. William stared at the folder like it was something radioactive. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found charming. Now it looked frantic. Danielle, he said quietly, attempting control, this isn't the time. It's precisely the time, I answered. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my voice remained steady. That steadiness unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Inside, however, I was unraveling in layers. 5 years. 5 years of marriage reduced to a strategic maneuver. Had I missed signs? Had I been arrogant? Too focused on growth to notice decay? A dangerous whisper surfaced in my mind. Maybe I drove him away. I crushed it immediately. Infidelity is a choice. Conspiracy is a choice. Public humiliation is a choice. I opened the folder slowly. Let's start with advisory compensation, I said, sliding a set of printed bank statements across the polished wood. $30,000 per month for strategic oversight. William stiffened. That was approved. Advisory compensation, I repeated, requires documented deliverables. There are none. Daniel stepped forward. You're twisting numbers. No, I replied quietly. I'm reading them. I turned another page. $47,000 in vintage wine purchases through the corporate account. Monica blinked. Daddy, you said that was client entertainment. William's jaw tightened. It was. Fascinating, I said softly. Considering none of our clients were present at the country club where those purchases were delivered, Daniel's breathing grew heavier. Stop. I looked at him fully for the first time that night. His eyes were not apologetic. They were angry. Angry that I knew. Angry that I wasn't collapsing. You underestimated me, I said quietly. I trusted you, he shot back. That's not the same thing. The tension pulsed through the chandelier crystals above us. Inside, I felt something shifting. Not rage, but clarity. For months, I had blamed stress, overwork, distance. But sitting there, watching my husband align himself with his father instead of me, I realized something far more painful. He hadn't fallen out of love. He had aligned with power. And when he believed power would shift away from me, he pivoted. William attempted one last maneuver. You're emotional, he said dismissively. You're misinterpreting complex financial structures. I held his gaze. I hired independent forensic auditors 2 months ago. Silence. Daniel froze. Monica whispered, What? I suspected discrepancies, I continued, before I ever suspected infidelity. The words hurt more than I expected. I had been suspicious of business before marriage. That realization carved deep. Daniel's voice lowered. You went behind my back? I protected what I built, I said, the same way I always have. He shook his head slowly, disbelief turning to desperation. You're destroying everything, he said. No, I replied. You tried to. My chest tightened briefly, grief mixing with adrenaline. I remembered the early days. Late nights when Daniel would bring takeout to my cramped office. How proud he once seemed. When had admiration turned to entitlement? Monica began crying softly now, mascara streaking. This is humiliating, she whispered. I almost laughed. Humiliating. That was the gift they had prepared for me tonight. Instead, they were tasting it themselves. Daniel stepped closer to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. We can fix this, he said urgently. You don't have to go nuclear. Fix. As if betrayal was a broken appliance. As if public replacement was a miscommunication. I looked at the man I had married, and for the first time, I didn't recognize him. Not because he had changed tonight, but because I finally saw him clearly. I'm not going nuclear, I said calmly. I'm going legal. And that was when the real escalation began. The air in the dining room turned volatile. William stood slowly, palms pressed against the table, as if physical dominance could compensate for legal vulnerability. You are making a catastrophic mistake, he said, voice low and controlled now, the dangerous kind of calm. I didn't flinch. No, I replied. The catastrophic mistake was assuming I wouldn't notice. Daniel moved closer to his father. That subtle alignment told me everything. Not beside me. Beside him, William shifted tactics. Let's be rational. Marriage is complicated. Businesses are complicated. There are misunderstandings. $500,000 charged to a company yacht in Miami is not a misunderstanding, I said. Monica's head snapped up. What yacht? I slid another document across the table. A 42-foot Sunseeker, registered under a subsidiary LLC, purchased with corporate funds, docked for 8 months. Monica stared at her father. You told me that boat belonged to the Weatherbys. William's face darkened. Danielle, you are grossly exaggerating. Actually, I said calmly, I had it seized this afternoon. Silence. Daniel blinked. You what? The marina was very cooperative once they reviewed ownership documents. William's composure cracked. You had no authority. I have full authority, I corrected. Majority shareholder, sole voting control, sole ownership of core assets. The words landed heavy. Daniel ran both hands through his hair now. This is insane. We were planning expansion. Expansion, I echoed. Is that what we call replacing the founder and installing your new associate? Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. William turned to her sharply. Evelyn, perhaps you should step outside. She hesitated. I held her gaze. You might want to hear this, I said gently. It concerns the role you were promised. She stayed. William's jaw tightened further. You have been advising her based on inaccurate information, I continued. The company is not available for acquisition. It cannot be transferred without my consent, and I have not given it. Daniel's voice sharpened. You're being vindictive. Vindictive? I almost smiled. You announced my divorce before I had even filed. Monica sobbed openly now. This can't go public. Our reputation. Reputation? I said quietly. Let's talk about that. I lifted another page. Consulting fees paid to William Thompson, $30,000 per month. No deliverables, no board authorization signatures, except ones later verified as altered. William's breathing grew heavy. You're accusing me of fraud? I'm presenting documentation, I answered. Daniel's eyes widened. Dad? William shot him a warning look. And there it was, cracks between them. For years, Daniel had trusted his father's guidance unquestioningly. Now doubt flickered. I continued carefully, each word deliberate. Forensic auditors flagged discrepancies 2 months ago. I delayed confrontation because I wanted clarity. Tonight provided it. Daniel's voice lowered. You planned this. I prepared, I corrected. He stepped closer, anger bleeding into panic. You could destroy us. I am not responsible for the consequences of your choices. William slammed his fist against the table. You ungrateful woman! We elevated you. We gave you access. To what? I interrupted softly. A network I already surpassed? A reputation built on misappropriated funds? His face reddened. You would still be in that tiny office above a restaurant if not for us. I felt something shift inside me. Not pain, but resolve. That tiny office built everything you're trying to claim. Daniel's voice trembled now. Danielle, we can negotiate. There it was. Not apology, negotiation. I realized in that moment, they didn't fear losing me. They feared losing leverage. Evelyn finally spoke, voice careful. Daniel, did you tell me the company wasn't fully under family control? He didn't answer. She looked at William. You implied majority oversight. William's silence was confirmation enough. Evelyn stood. I don't participate in unstable governance structures, she said calmly. Especially not ones under investigation. Under investigation. That phrase rippled through the room like thunder. William glared at me. You wouldn't dare. I already did, I replied. I contacted counsel at the federal level regarding financial irregularities. Monica gasped. The IRS? I prefer thoroughness. Daniel looked at me like I'd grown unfamiliar edges. You're ruthless, he whispered. No, I was prepared. The room was unraveling, alliances shifting, fear replacing arrogance. For the first time since walking into that mansion, I felt something solid under my feet. Not anger, ground. And that's when Daniel made his final, desperate attempt. You're throwing away 5 years, he said. I looked at him. Really looked at him. You threw them away first. After the shouting slowed and the documents lay scattered across polished mahogany like fallen cards in a rigged game, something unexpected happened. The adrenaline began to drain, and beneath it, grief surfaced. Not for the company, not for the money, for the marriage I had once believed was real. Daniel stopped arguing first. His anger collapsed into something quieter, something that almost resembled regret. Danielle, he said, voice hoarse now, we can still fix this. We don't have to end like this. End like this, as if tonight had created the ending, as if the ending hadn't been building for months. William stood rigid beside him, but I could see calculation replacing fury, damage control, legal containment, narrative strategy. Monica had retreated into a chair, mascara streaked, whispering to herself about reputation and headlines. The room that had felt theatrical earlier now felt hollow. Christmas music drifted faintly from another part of the mansion, some cheerful instrumental version of Silent Night. The irony almost hurt. I suddenly felt very tired. 5 years replayed in fragments. The wedding photos, Daniel lifting me off the ground laughing, late nights on the couch reviewing projections together. The way he once looked at me like I was extraordinary. Had that ever been love? Or just admiration for an asset? You humiliated me, Daniel said softly, almost accusingly. I blinked. You invited a replacement to dinner, I replied. That wasn't finalized, he muttered. It didn't need to be. The intention was enough. And that was when the loneliness hit. Not because I was surrounded by hostility, but because I realized I had been alone in this marriage long before tonight. All the subtle dismissals, the way he stopped defending me in front of his father, the way he rolled his eyes when I insisted on legal safeguards. He hadn't stood beside me in years. I just hadn't admitted it. William finally spoke again, voice controlled but edged. You are destroying your own stability out of pride. I met his gaze. My stability does not depend on your approval, he scoffed. But something in his eyes flickered. Uncertainty. Daniel stepped closer one last time. If you go through with this, it won't just hurt my father. It will ruin everything we built socially. Our standing, our network. There it was again. Reputation, not trust, not fidelity. Not love. Standing. I built my life before your network, I said quietly. I can build it again without it. His face shifted, not anger now, but fear. For a moment, I almost wavered, not because I doubted myself, but because ending something, even something broken, carries weight. The house suddenly felt enormous and empty. The holiday lights outside the windows blurred slightly as my vision tightened. This was the lowest point. Not the confrontation, not the documents, but the acceptance. Acceptance that the man I married chose strategy over loyalty. Acceptance that his family never saw me as more than leverage. Acceptance that I would walk out alone. And yet, beneath the grief, there was something else. Relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend. Relief that the tension I'd carried in my chest for months finally had a name. Betrayal. Daniel reached for my hand instinctively. I stepped back. That small movement seemed louder than all the shouting earlier. "Don't," I said softly. His hand fell. The chandelier light reflected off the shattered wine glass, still scattered across the tablecloth. The celebration they had planned had turned into exposure, and I realized something with painful clarity. This wasn't the moment my life was collapsing. It was the moment I stopped being manipulated by the illusion of belonging. The darkness wasn't failure. It was clarity, and clarity, even when it hurts, is powerful. The shift didn't come with shouting. It came with silence. The kind of silence that follows realization. Daniel stood there, hands slack at his sides, no longer posturing. William had retreated into calculation mode, eyes distant, already thinking 3 legal moves ahead. Monica had stopped crying and was now staring at me as if I had transformed into something unfamiliar. But I hadn't transformed. I had stopped shrinking. Evelyn broke the silence. "I need to clarify something," she said carefully, her voice steady but no longer confident. "When Mr. Thompson approached me about restructuring, I was told the company had majority family oversight." William's jaw flexed. Daniel looked at the floor. I answered instead. "There is no majority family oversight," I said calmly. "There never has been." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "So you misrepresented ownership," she said to William, not accusingly, but clinically. William didn't respond. That was confirmation enough. Evelyn straightened her coat. "I built my career on compliance and governance," she said evenly. "I don't attach myself to instability, especially not legal instability." Daniel looked up sharply. "Evelyn." "No," she cut him off. "You assured me everything was secured. It was subtle, but I saw it." The moment Daniel realized he had miscalculated not just me, but everyone, Evelyn turned to me. "I apologize if I was unknowingly part of something inappropriate." "You were presented incomplete information," I replied. "That isn't your fault." She nodded once, and then she left. The sound of the front door closing echoed faintly down the hall. One piece removed. William's control narrowed. Daniel's plan fractured. The room felt colder. William tried once more. "We can settle this privately," he said, voice measured again. "You don't need regulators involved. We can restructure the advisory fees, adjust compensation." There it was. Negotiation. Not denial anymore. Negotiation. "Corporate misuse of funds is not a clerical error," I said quietly. Daniel's voice trembled now. "You don't have to destroy my father." I looked at him steadily. I didn't. William's empire had been built on intimidation, on assumption, on people believing his influence was untouchable. Tonight, that illusion cracked. And in that crack, I saw my own power clearly for the first time. Not because I had wealth, not because I had legal leverage, but because I had prepared. I had trusted my instincts months ago when something felt wrong. I had quietly audited accounts, documented patterns, secured counsel, not out of vengeance, out of responsibility. Daniel stepped forward again, softer now. "What do you want?" he asked. The question lingered in the air. For years I had wanted partnership, respect, defense when his father belittled me, loyalty. Tonight I wanted something simpler, peace. "I want separation," I said. The word felt solid, final. Monica inhaled sharply. William's eyes narrowed. Daniel looked as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "You can't mean that," he whispered. "I do." There was no tremor in my voice now, no doubt. just clarity. The divorce will proceed. The auditors will proceed. My attorneys will contact yours before New Year's. William opened his mouth to argue. I raised a hand gently. This isn't emotional, I said. It's structural. That statement changed the energy completely. They could attack hysteria. They could manipulate emotion. But structure? Structure was facts, documents, signatures, ownership. Daniel's shoulders slumped for the first time. I thought you needed us, he admitted quietly. There it was. The assumption. I shook my head. I never did. And in that moment, something irreversible settled into place. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam doors. I picked up my coat. That quiet action seemed to unsettle them more than anything I had said. Daniel watched me like he was waiting for a final emotional collapse, some last-minute plea, some softening. It didn't come. Danielle, he tried again, voice smaller now. If this goes public, it will, I replied. William straightened immediately. You are making an enemy of this family. I held his gaze. You made that decision when you tried to erase me. The words hung heavy in the air. Monica's mascara-streaked face turned toward her father. Daddy, is this real? The yacht? The accounts? William didn't answer. Silence can be more damning than confession. Daniel finally stepped aside as I moved toward the doorway. Not because he wanted to, because he had no ground left to stand on. At the threshold of the dining room, I paused. Not for them. For myself. 5 Christmases spent trying to prove I belonged at that table. 5 years of tolerating subtle contempt disguised as refinement. And tonight, they had handed me clarity, wrapped in gold ribbon. Merry Christmas, I said evenly. No one responded. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. Outside, snow fell quietly. The world looked calm, untouched by corporate implosion and marital collapse. My phone began buzzing before I even reached my car. Daniel. Then William. Then Daniel again. I let it ring. For 5 years, I had answered immediately. Tonight, silence was my response. The drive felt surreal. Streetlights blurred softly through falling snow. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but inside, emotions moved in waves. Grief, anger, relief. Mostly relief. When I arrived at the townhouse I had quietly purchased 3 years earlier under a holding company, I sat in the driveway for a moment, breathing. That house was modest. Brick, 3 bedrooms, no marble floors, no chandeliers. But it was mine. Inside, the quiet wrapped around me like something protective. The calls turned into text messages. Daniel first. We need to talk. Don't do this. This can be fixed. Then William, you will regret this. You are jeopardizing everything. You have no idea what you're starting. Then Monica, incoherent pleas about reputation, about society, about scandal. Around 11:30 p.m., a different call came through. My lead attorney. I just received contact from Thompson Counsel, he said calmly. They're requesting urgent negotiation. Of course they were. Power shifts quickly when paperwork surfaces. Proceed as planned, I told him. Yes, ma'am. The next 48 hours unfolded like controlled demolition. The yacht was frozen under asset review. Corporate accounts flagged. Board members notified of irregularities. Whispers began circulating quietly among investors. By Monday morning, William's name was under informal inquiry. Not headline scandal. Not yet, but tremors were visible. Daniel's social circle shifted immediately. The same people who toasted at our wedding began distancing themselves. Reputation, it turns out, is fragile when built on assumption. By Wednesday, Daniel's tone in his messages changed. No more threats. Just, I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't think you would. He never finished those sentences. He hadn't thought I would defend myself. That was the truth. William attempted one final intimidation call through a mutual contact. I declined. The legal process moved forward. The divorce filing was clean. The prenuptial agreement held. Business ownership remained intact. Within weeks, advisory contracts were terminated. William's access revoked. His strategic oversight evaporated overnight. And the most ironic part, the company stabilized, without inflated expenses, without misappropriated funds, without interference disguised as guidance. Performance improved. The very narrative they had crafted, that I needed oversight, collapsed under numbers. Daniel moved out of the mansion within 2 months, not because he had to, but because proximity to his father became uncomfortable once scrutiny intensified. The family that once moved like royalty now moved cautiously, quietly, carefully. And I did not celebrate. There was no triumphant toast, no revenge speech, just space. Space to breathe, space to rebuild without walking on emotional glass. They tried to give me humiliation for Christmas. Instead, they handed me separation. And the consequences they feared most were not the ones I orchestrated. They were the ones their own actions triggered. The first night I slept in the townhouse without my phone buzzing felt unfamiliar. Not lonely, just quiet. There's a difference. For years, I mistook tension for normalcy. I mistook criticism for refinement. I mistook endurance for loyalty. When the noise stopped, the subtle digs, the strategic meetings, the constant need to prove myself, I realized how heavy that noise had been. The divorce finalized faster than anyone expected. The prenuptial agreement held exactly as written. The company remained mine, legally, structurally, entirely. William's advisory contracts dissolved. Investigations into financial irregularities didn't explode into scandal, but they were enough to limit his influence permanently. Investors grew cautious. Boards grew stricter. Power shifted quietly. Daniel tried reaching out a few times after everything settled, not to negotiate, not to argue, to reminisce. I didn't think you'd leave, he admitted during one brief civil conversation. I answered honestly. I didn't think you'd choose power over partnership. There was no shouting left between us, just distance. The hardest part wasn't exposing the betrayal. It was accepting that love without respect is a liability. I rebuilt my routines. Morning runs through quiet streets, coffee in my own kitchen without judgment. Meetings where my voice was the final authority, not an accessory to someone else's legacy. The company grew leaner, stronger, without unnecessary overhead, without unnecessary people. And I learned something that Christmas night that no MBA, no inheritance, no mansion could teach. If someone tries to humiliate you publicly, it's because they believe you won't stand up. If someone aligns with power instead of truth, they were never aligned with you. And if you have to shrink to stay married, you're already alone. They tried to stage my replacement like a corporate announcement. Instead, they revealed their assumptions. I didn't win because I was ruthless. I won because I was prepared. Prepared legally, prepared financially, prepared emotionally, even if I didn't realize it at the time. Freedom doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a quiet townhouse on a snow-covered street. Sometimes it sounds like silence. That Christmas dinner was supposed to be my humiliation. It became my exit. And walking away with my dignity intact, that was the real gift.